You are listening to Viewpoints from Place Cloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
Stand on the windswept grounds of Fort Maurits today near the banks of the São Francisco River in northeastern Brazil, and it's hard to imagine the colonial drama that once unfolded here, where cannon fire echoed across the mangroves and Dutch banners flew over newly conquered land. This was not only a frontier of empire, but also the outer edge of a conflict that would shake the very foundations of colonial governance in Dutch Brazil. Constructed under the command of John Maurice of Nassau-Siegen, Fort Maurits symbolized the military reach and territorial ambition of Dutch Brazil in the early 1640s. The fort's foundation came after a sweeping campaign to subdue resistance in the region and secure the southern boundary of the colony. Its construction was a statement. Dutch authority would not merely occupy, it would dominate. But Fort Maurits also stood as a costly achievement. Every brick laid and every shipment of powder delivered came with a price tag that worried the Dutch West India Company back in Amsterdam. As Nassau expanded his control outward through forts and roads, he also built inward, constructing a courtly, princely world at the heart of Recife. And there, far from the muddy ramparts of Fort Maurits, a very different kind of power was being performed. In Recife, Nassau transformed a colonial port into Mauritsstad, a capital city aspiring to mirror itself in the courts of Europe. At its center stood the Palacio Friburgo, adorned with painted salons and flanked by scientific gardens, an observatory, and a zoo. Nassau's court boasted artists like Frans Post and Albert Eckhout, philosophers, naturalists, and military advisors, an entourage more typical of the Dutch Republic's nobility than its overseas governors. This rule by spectacle was deliberate. In a contested landscape, Nassau used architecture, science, and aesthetics as political tools. His city was a theater of civilization and control, designed to impress allies, awe subordinates, and signal permanence to potential foes. But it was also expensive. While the Brazil of Nassau dazzled visitors, directors of the West India Company grew increasingly anxious about the ballooning costs and the Governor-General's quasi-sovereign posture. Where they had sent a military leader to manage a conquest, they now saw a prince building a court. In 1639, the company dispatched Krzysztof Arciszewski, a Polish-born quartermaster, to audit the colony's military stores. His job was technical, bureaucratic, and deeply political. At stake were the material realities behind the colonial pageantry. How much powder was left at Fort Maurits? Were armories properly maintained? Was Nassau justifying his expenditures? His very presence threatened to puncture the illusion of princely autonomy that Nassau had cultivated, and the Governor-General responded accordingly. He dismissed Arciszewski almost immediately and shipped him back to Europe, bypassing protocol and ignoring the company's authority. The action may have been swift, but it was not subtle. In removing the auditor, Nassau had sent a message, not just to the company, but to his entire administration, that the stage belonged to him alone. The incident sparked outrage in Amsterdam. The West India Company, already unsettled by Nassau's Baroque governance and unchecked building campaigns, saw in Arciszewski's expulsion a dangerous assertion of personal rule. Letters flew, directors fumed, and while Nassau remained in power for several more years, the incident marked a rupture. The company could no longer ignore the tension between its model of collective, accountable rule and the charismatic autocracy that had taken hold in Brazil. Fort Maurits, meanwhile, stood as a silent witness to this contradiction. Built as a symbol of conquest, it became part of the ledger that auditors like Arciszewski were trying to reconcile, a place where military expansion met fiscal unease. Shortly after Nassau was recalled to Europe in 1644, Dutch Brazil was beginning to unravel. The court dissolved, the Portuguese reconquest loomed, and many of the structures that had once defined Mauritsstad would fall into ruin. Yet a legacy of his rule endures, not only in the paintings and city plans that survived, but in the paradox his governance revealed. Nassau's Brazil was not just a colony of arms, it was a colony of images. It was ruled as much by canon as by choreography, by forts and festivals alike. The Arciszewski affair, though often sidelined in historical accounts, shows us the friction between these two regimes of control, the spreadsheet and the stage. And here, at the location of Fort Maurits, we find the residue of both. No fort, no ruins, only memory.